Hello, welcome back to the Decipher podcast. I'm Dennis Fisher here with Lindsey O'Donnell Welch. Lindsey, it's so good to be back with you. It's been, I think, 2 days, 3 days since we relaunched the site on our own independently. And as we said in our first podcast, it's something we've been working on together for about a year. And it's just so nice to have it back out in the world and finally let everybody know that we're back and we're doing this. And I don't know about you, but I got so many messages on social media and LinkedIn and just texts from people I hadn't heard from in a long time, just saying how happy they were for us and also just happy that Decipher was back in general.
Yeah, I've really loved seeing the reaction and being able to now talk about this publicly to people, and really excited to kind of get the ball rolling. And yeah, the news this week that has started to happen that we're going to talk about today is kind of a good starting point.
Yeah,
So
we've both been doing other things. And I mean, we're still in the security industry and you kind of follow the news just by default because we've been doing it for so long. And it's just, that's your reflex in the morning. You just wake up and look and see what broke overnight or what happened. But not really to the degree that we used to on a daily basis. We're writing 2 or 3 or 4 stories a day.
true. Yeah. I was going to say, like, I feel like we're in the mindset where even if I'm on vacation, like on the beach or something, like I remember, I think I was on maternity leave or something when Colonial Pipeline happened. And I was like, this is crazy. Like,
You were. And I
yeah.
think I said, put your phone away and stop looking at it. Yeah, go
Yes.
take care of your daughter.
So the
But
news never stops. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's great to be back. And we're going to be doing, weekly or twice weekly podcasts on the news and interviews and things like that. If you've followed our podcast in the past, you'll see what we're doing. You'll know what's up. But today I think we wanted to hit a couple of things. And I think the biggest story in the last, I guess, 2 weeks has been this Salesloft. Breach isn't really the right descriptor for it. It's more of, I guess, incident, but for, the audience, I'm sure is aware of this, but this company called Salesloft that does sort of marketing as a service and is tightly integrated in a lot of environments with Salesforce to do, customer stuff, the things that Salesforce does. Salesloft does some of the automation for that and has some AI integrations and is used in a ton of places, which we're finding out now. And there was a recent string of incidents where attackers had gotten OAuth tokens for those integrations and were hitting organizations' Salesforce tenants to try and gather customer data, essentially. Most of what I've seen described is the attackers were able to get some limited customer information, essentially contact info, customer names, and also some support case information in some cases. It could be as benign as like, hey, we're having a problem with this and a case number, or in some cases where the customers send sensitive information through the support portal, that some of that kind of stuff may have been accessed depending on how the organization has that set up. A lot of organizations that have it configured that they won't accept, API keys, secrets, that kind of stuff in those portals, but some don't. And, we've seen dozens of companies, I think, come out publicly and talk about this. I think there's probably many, many more, and we're going to hear about those, over the next few weeks. But this seems like one of those incidents. You mentioned the Snowflake breach from about a year ago, the Move It transfer thing from a couple of years ago now. Good analogy where they just have this kind of long tail, and I probably think see the steady drip of these over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I remember especially with Move It, like we just continued to see companies come out with that over the course of like weeks and months, and even like a year later, there were people that were, talking about how they were impacted. But what's interesting about this too is exactly what you mentioned, like the integration piece means that there's just so much that's wound into that because there's sales Loft Drift, and then there's Salesforce, which, as you said, that's kind of the Salesloft Drift. Helps customers kind of interface with their Salesforce instances. And then there's the companies that are being impacted. As you mentioned, there's a ton of companies that have come out, including Cloudflare, which had that, really detailed blog post this week.
Yeah.
And then there's also the downstream customers of those companies that are then being impacted. And, I almost feel like that part of all of this is being lost in a lot of the reports that I've read, is just like what this means for those customers, how their data has been accessed, and how threat actors could potentially use it in the future. So there's just like a ton of different moving pieces at play here. And there's also a lot of different advisories being thrown around. Like, I know Salesloft Drift came out with their initial security advisory, and that didn't have too many details, but it said,
Yeah.
things happening, and here's what we're seeing. And then we're getting more details from the companies like Cloudflare that are saying, here's what we're seeing, here's what's being accessed, here's what this means for our customers and what you need to do. So I think there's just a lot of pieces, and it's interesting from someone who's trying to like understand this and like communicate it, from the journalism side of things, like how these all play together and how to best, figure out what is going on.
Yeah. That's one of the things that you and I talk about a lot, and we talk about with our other, friends who are journalists too, is how do you communicate the strike the balance of the technical and the sort of here's what you need to know type stuff. And this does strike me again as one of those companies. Salesloft, I'd never heard of them. This I think happened with the Snowflake thing and a couple of others where you're just like, I don't know what this company is, and I have to go figure it out. And I was reading some stuff on Reddit this morning in a long thread about, these were practitioners trying to figure out what the whole situation was. And one of the folks was like, what is Salesloft? I don't know. We have it in our environment. I don't know what it is. So that's somebody that's in like an admin or network engineer position and is probably having to deal with this. And then probably trying to figure out if their downstream customers are affected somehow too.
Right. And there's that component, like what is Salesloft, but then, and this is something we see with a lot of the other incidents, is my understanding based on Salesloft page is that they actually acquired Drift like in 2024. So there's just the acquisition and integration piece of everything and how that all plays together too. And how that then fits into, vendor or company environments, and how, as you said, that, then interacts with their downstream customers. It's just a lot of different layers. And like, I think part of that too, and all of this is people trying to understand like responsibility and,
Yeah.
who manages what. And I mean, that was something interesting about, to me, Cloudflare's advisory that they came out with this week. There was one piece of it where they basically said, that they said, we are responsible for the tools that we select. And when those tools are compromised by sophisticated threat actors, we own the consequences, something along that line.
Yes.
That was really interesting to me, because we see a lot of these third party, like supply chainy types of breaches. And I would say in most of the posts that I've seen from, companies or vendors that have been impacted in the past, they've said, hey, we got hit through a third party supplier or something. Your data is, like essentially like pushing the onus and the blame back on that.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
it's really unique, and I think almost like this might be a little bit of a shift moving forward on how companies kind of handle this, going forward.
I thought that was really interesting too. I'm glad you called that out because I stopped on that sentence and I was like, am I reading what I think I'm reading? Somebody taking responsibility for, something not like we messed this up, but accepting the fact that yes, we chose this vendor. and there happened to be an issue with that. And ultimately, from a Cloudflare customer perspective, they see that as Cloudflare's failing, which, in that blog post, they said, listen, we take that responsibility on ourselves. We picked this tool. There was an issue with it. That's on us. That's 180 degrees from what we normally see. It's, as you said, Linz, it's a third party. Yeah, I mean, you can just control F and look third party. You know exactly what it's going to say in one of these blog posts. Not
Right.
us. Not us. We didn't do it. Don't look over here. Look over there.
Yeah.
That's usually how it is. And that's completely understandable because there's legal ramifications, all of that kind of stuff. And you don't want your customers throwing rocks at you if you can point them to somebody else. But
Right.
in this, I really thought that was interesting. It's I don't know if refreshing is the right word, but it was
Yeah.
different. That's for sure. You don't see
Yeah.
that.
I know. And it also comes at a time as you mentioned, we've seen a lot of these types of breaches. And the narrative has always been like companies now need to be really careful about who what tools they use, what third-party suppliers. That's been the narrative, at least in the security media world. And I
Yeah.
wonder if this is a step of at least this particular company saying, you're right, we need to focus in on security in addition to functionality. Here's kind of what this means. And I would be really curious to sit in on kind of those conversations as they happen, and the particular questions that need to be asked when you're looking at third party tools, because there's just so many, and there's so many different integrations that happen right now. Like you mentioned, people don't even understand what's in their environment.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really complicated uh, situation or process or workflow that companies need to go through, and it's kind of a headache. But then you get something like this, and this is exactly why that needs to happen.
We've seen this many times over the last, I don't know, probably 5 to 7 years of these supply chain attacks that have had these long cascading effects. We keep bringing up Move It. That's the one that just sticks in my head. But there's many others that aren't as well publicized, or just not big names or whatever it is. And I think one of the things that I've had conversations with CISOs and other security folks about is how much of that third party risk their organization is willing to absorb, and kind of has to absorb to do business with, or to use some of these tools. Some in some cases you don't really have a ton of options if you have a specific task that you need to get done in your organization, and this is the one, or maybe there's two tools that do that one thing. And especially say in like an OT environment, or SCADA or
Yeah.
something like that, there could be one provider that does the thing that you need to do. And
Right.
it, are you going to go in and audit their code? You're probably not. You don't have time for that. You need to,
Yeah.
you need to keep your business running. And you know, on a different scale with things like this, cloud tools and SaaS tools, that people are just like, okay, we want to automate this, or we need an AI assistant to respond to incoming customer requests until we can actually get a live person on them. That kind
Yeah.
of stuff doesn't get the same kind of scrutiny that maybe it should.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to talk to people who make those decisions, or CISOs or security, people that look at this. But for something like this, for Salesloft Drift, that is just, it's an AI chatbot. And my understanding is that it kind of helps with the sales process as it relates to user interfaces.
Sure.
But yeah, something something sales, integration process.
Yeah.
But like the what level of risk would you want to accept for something like that? Because it seems like a lot of companies, I think Cloudflare said hundreds of companies are impacted by this. So
Yeah.
it seems like a lot of companies seem okay to put that sort of thing in their environment. I don't know what obviously kinds of conversations they have around risk and how something like this would impact their risk factor, but um, like, and how that might relate to a different application or a different function. So like, where do those all fall along the spectrum of, handling that risk versus needing that functionality in your environment?
I think, to me, we are still so far at the very, very beginning of this whole AI thing. There have been chatbots on websites for, a decade or more. That was, obviously very basic uh, AI functionality, that not much to it. But it's only been about 3 or not even 4 years before, Chat GPT hit the mainstream and everybody sort of lost their collective shit and was like, this is what we can do. And everybody was kind of in this race to the bottom with all these LLMs and AI applications. And I think if you go and read some of the stuff that people who have been working on this for a long time, like our friend Gary McGraw, who, did his PhD in machine learning like 40 years ago or something like that. Sorry, Gary. Um, you'll see that even those, like, you should not be trusting AI generated code with anything that, you really care about. It's We're so early on in this. There's specific applications that I've heard good use cases for. If you have a trained engineer who is using a coding assistant to help them automate specific tasks, but there's still a human involved in this. Cool. If it's speeding things up and helping you scale better, great. But I don't necessarily want, AI just generating entire applications on its own. And then at some point, somebody's going to feed customer data into that thing.
Mhm.
And what? But, you can write the
Yeah.
ending. Like nothing good is going to come from that. I'm not saying like
Yeah.
that's not what happened here, but we're, going down this road with AI and AI generated applications that are, there's not a lot of guardrails around it yet. There's not a lot of regulation. There's not a lot of good coding standards. There's very little security, review or oversight or standards. Forget about that. They haven't even gotten close to that yet.
Yeah, it's so early right now, and like it's something we've been looking at over the past, 2 years since it has been like an explosion on the consumer side of things. But like, yeah, that's something that's a little, um, tricky right now. So
Yeah, very
yeah,
much so.
yeah,
And, kind of related to that, another bit of news that I wanted to bring up that I saw this morning was the NSA and CISA and about, I don't know, 3 or 4 dozen other national, like not certs, but like NCSC from the UK and the French cybersecurity organization, all these big national cybersecurity organizations put out, I wouldn't even call it guidance, but almost like an explainer about SBOMs yesterday. And it was sort of, CISA has been big on SBOMs for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, probably, maybe even a little longer than that.
yeah,
And, for folks that don't know what we're talking about, software bill of materials, which, in the very simplest way I can explain it, is an ingredient list for what's in your software. That's a very basic, you can go read about. But there's been a lot of talk about them and their value and what they're good for and that kind of thing. And this, I don't know, like position paper, whatever it was that CISA and all these government organizations released yesterday, is essentially like just encouraging organizations and developers and companies to use SBOMs and kind of describing what the value and use cases for them are, and also what it's not. Like, not a panacea, not a band-aid for, it's not a replacement for vulnerability management. It's not a replacement for SDLCs. It's not a replacement for having trained engineers write your code.
yeah,
And I'm not really sure, like the timing seemed a little odd to me because, as we know, CISA is being gutted and the the guy who was the biggest SBOM advocate at CISA is either gone or is on the way out. So
Yeah.
it seemed a little weird to me, the timing, but um, I didn't, I just didn't know what to make of it. And it had like, literally probably 24 countries, national cybersecurity organizations signed on to it.
Yeah, that's odd. I feel like what sticks out to me is the collaboration with
Mm-hmm.
other countries and agencies on that. Like, is
Yeah, this is
yeah,
the thing they picked to collaborate on. Like,
yeah, like of
not
all
to,
the things,
yeah,
like, yeah.
not to
Well, I'm
denigrate S bombs, but
yeah, I know. There's a lot of different other things that they could Uh, but that is interesting, and I think you're right. Like CISA, it's something that they've been looking at for a while. I'm glad that that it seems like they said that they highlighted what it's not, and in terms of it not being vulnerability management, not being like a silver bullet or anything like that. But that's really interesting, like the timing, and it's hard because you have no insight into was there some sort of incident that we're unaware of that might have triggered this, or like something that this is just something they've been working on for years and they just happen to release it right now.
I
um
I wonder. I don't know. The person I mentioned, Alan Friedman, I should have mentioned him by name, has been the big advocate at CISA for SBOMs. I think he announced about a month ago that he was leaving CISA. I'm not sure whether he's actually left yet, but he's been the public face of this effort inside the government. And he's also done a lot of private sector collaborations and joint efforts, the way that these things go.
mhm.
But I just wondered if this was, kind of let's get this out the door now. But like you said, was there some reason behind it? I don't know. And I
Yeah.
kept waiting for like the section that said, now we require government agencies to do XYZ, but there wasn't that. It was just
Huh.
kind of, like I said, an explainer almost. Like, it was,
Yeah,
they called it a
it's
shared vision of SBOMs for cybersecurity, which was
that's
like,
interesting too, because there's so many different regulations and so many different unique attributes to different countries and how they handle cybersecurity and how
yeah,
they work between private and public sector, and like it seems like such a big topic that like would be hard to juggle a shared vision of like across different countries like that.
I
um
completely
yeah.
agree. Yeah, I don't know that this many countries have a shared vision for anything, let alone like software bills of materials. But I guess it's nice that some of these countries still want to talk to us. That's good.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It's
I
a
mean, I've
positive
seen
sign.
plenty of good international like collaboration around takedowns and things like that.
That's true. Yeah,
That's
that's a great
that's where that
example.
shines. Yeah.
But
Um,
yeah, there's a very, not very long, but years long history of that, with the FBI and Europol and the various other national law enforcement bodies. Yeah, collaborating on, like botnet takedowns or, cybercrime forums or things like that. But I don't really, I'm sure there are other examples, but I can't really come up with one off the top of my head of this kind of thing in the recent past.
yeah, because the only like I know like CISA has been they push like a lot of things to do with like secure by design, or maybe
Yes.
like you know um even just like super high level like cyber hygiene types of things like
Hmm.
patch management, their Kev catalog, things like that. But that seems to be very isolated to that one agency. And so, yeah, I don't see a lot of collaboration around that with kind of other agencies that at least is publicly released.
The one thing that it did make me think of is, you wrote this section. We when we relaunched the site this week, we released kind of an editor's note of like, here's where Decipher came from, and here's what we hope to do with it. And you wrote a little section about newcomers and embracing newcomers to the security field, and this did kind of make me think of yes, we've been sort of embedded in this for a very long time, and this stuff is just like table stakes and old hat to us. But there are always, there's people that came out of college 6 months ago that are like, I don't know what an SBOM is. Like, this is cool, or there's people that are moving from network admins to security or software security from something else, and need to get up to speed on this kind of stuff. And there's always new people coming in and out of governments, especially ours. And they're it could
Yeah.
just be one of those statements of position by all these folks saying, here's what we think about this right now, and here's where we see it being useful, kind of thing.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
guidance for, even like, smaller organizations that are just trying to better understand security and how it impacts them too. Because I think SBOM is like a little, like, it's not a buzzword, but like it's something that is thrown around, I would say, a fair amount.
Hmm.
So, it is good to have kind of better understanding of, from like a government entity, like about what that means for, companies and how, their risk management and things like that. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I'd be curious to see like if they release more like shared vision things like this, around other things as well,
Yes.
or if this
What
is
other
kind of
visions
one
are
thing.
we sharing with like the Canadian
Yeah,
Cybersecurity
yeah,
Authority, or the French Cybersecurity Authority? I don't know. But
yeah.
I imagine this probably took about 18 months to actually produce because of
Oh yeah,
just the number of organizations involved. And it's only like 8 or 9 pages. So, yeah, imagine
impressive.
just like the
Yeah,
two of us trying to write a 500-word editor's note took like a week. You get,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
12 cybersecurity agencies trying to write this. I'm sure it took a year and a half
yeah. Lots of hoops, I'd imagine.
for sure. Yep. All right. Well, I think that about does it for us this week. Thank you, everyone, for coming back and joining us. We really appreciate it. As we've made clear, we're very happy to have Decipher in our hands, and we're really happy to see everybody coming along with us and excited for where we go from here. I think I mentioned on that earlier podcast, which we recorded quite a while ago and finally put out into the world. We're going to be reviving our hacker movie podcast, which we did many of, but we're gonna start again. We're gonna redo a bunch of those, and we're gonna get going soon. So keep an eye out for those. And if there's folks out there that would like to participate, feel free to get in touch. Our emails are on the site, but mine is dennis@decipher.sc, and Lindsay's is lindsay@decipher.sc. Feel free to get in touch. And if you have any people you'd like to see on the podcast or topics you want us to cover, let us know.
Yeah. We're excited to kind of dive into things, and yeah, all open ears too. So anything that people want to hear about, feel free to shoot an email or ping or whatever. And yeah.
All right. All right, Linz. Good to see you. Talk to
Yeah,
you
you
soon.
too. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.